Hello, my name is Nick, and before I got long COVID, I was in marching band. I was also part of the school swim team, and I was a very smart child. I was in AP courses every year of high school, except for this most previous one. And I had straight A's in all my classes because, it was important to me that I do well. And, so after I got COVID and subsequently long COVID, it was very rough for me to go to school and stuff. Like, my classes, online classes, they weren't too terrible, but, it was kind of hard to focus, especially when, you can't really ask for a one-on-one because you missed something. And, there were recorded and you could go back and watch them, but there's not much you could really do unless you went into school for some one-on-one tutoring. And then when we transitioned into in-person school my senior year, it was very hard for me to attend because, I had a giant backpack with stuff with AP textbooks, and my classes, they were all on the third floor, and I didn't realize that we had access to the elevators. Well, we didn't, but, if you went to the office and bought a key, then you could use the elevators, but I figured that was only for people with broken limbs or whatever. So a lot of the time, most days, I was absent because I just felt terrible. I couldn't get up, and I couldn't take a shower. It was so hard to take a shower and be presentable, and because the heat from it would just cause me to react, and so after 3 weeks of absences, I went to my counselor, and I talked with my teachers, and we were like, hey, what can we do about this? And there was an option for it's called homebound, but since COVID, they haven't actually been able to do homebound. You still have to go somewhere. So I had to go to the public library to try and get caught back up on many, many weeks of instruction and work that I had missed. So we decided that it would probably be better just to, even though it really hurt my ego to do it, it was better to just give up and graduate early. And I feel like the main thing that could have helped is just offering virtual, because even though virtual wasn't great, it was still far better than what I experienced my senior year. And I hate that I couldn't perform the way that I wanted to my senior year, because if I could have finished the 2 APs I took, then I probably would have been top of my class for GPA. But unfortunately, that was not in the cards. Well, that's my experience. I hope this helped.
My name is Anna. I am 10 years old and I have long COVID. Before I was sick, I played soccer and I took art classes for learning to draw cartoons. I love to read and play video games. My favorite book is Harry Potter, and I have read the whole series. Since I have been sick, I've had to take a break from most of the things that I like to do. Some things I have learned how to do differently, like drawing on the iPad, because it takes less energy and doesn't hurt my hand. I used to be really good at school, but since getting sick, I have had a really hard time. The school has tried to help me with a tutor, but me and my parents would like to know if there's any other things my school can do to make it easier. Reading is one of my biggest problems because all of my classes have stuff for me to read. I'm just a lot slower reader than I used to be, and I lose my place a lot. I learned to use my finger below what I'm reading to help me keep my spot. I feel like even once I get through what I'm reading and answer the question, I don't remember as much as it as I should have, and I hate it. I wasn't able to do school in person for 4 months after being sick, but went back for a half days before we let out for the year. It was very difficult to pay attention in class. I had to take a lot of breaks. The loudness at the hallway and the lunchroom was very overwhelming. Assemblies were horrible. Not only does the sound make me very uncomfortable, but I am scared of getting COVID again, what it will do to me. I wear a mask, but most other kids were not by the end of the year. And when I have to take off mine to eat or drink, I feel like I'm asking to get sicker. I feel like my teachers don't really understand when I ask for help or to do something differently because I look totally normal and they can't tell how I feel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Back to School in 2022. I'm Dr. Melissa Ramirez. I'm a local school psychologist in Western Pennsylvania. I am honored to be here today to talk to you about long COVID and its impacts on learning. But what we also know is just not impacts on learning, but it's also impacts on the whole child, academically, social, emotional, and behaviorally. And so those are going to be some critical pieces that we talk about today as we talk about advocating for our students. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk the talk. I want you to know how to advocate for your child with what I'm going to refer to as post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 infection, or PASC. And then I want us to think about the whole child, social, emotional, academic, behavioral well-being, and what does that mean in the school setting? So like I said, I'm Dr. Melissa Ramirez. I'm a nationally certified school psychologist. I have been practicing school psychologist mostly at the secondary level, so for grades 7 through 12, at a local district in Western Pennsylvania. I am a passionate advocate for families and for children. And I just love meeting your little ones, and I just love supporting everything about them in the school setting. And I am honored to be here today to continue to support you in any way that I can. So let's talk long COVID impacts on learning, or what I call PASC. So here's what we know. We want to talk teams. And teams is so easy to say, but it's not always easy to do, but that's exactly what we need to do when we're thinking about our approach to PASC. So why am I calling it PASC? Because the National Institute of Health recently started using the term post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 infection. And we really, as a committee of psychologists, of school psychologists, really believe that this is an important takeaway because we think it really accurately describes the symptoms and complications experienced after the virus is no longer detected. And I think that's an important thing because we understand that can be so difficult for families and so difficult for students to navigate. And, from my perspective, in particular for students at that secondary level, because now we're talking about credits and graduation and college and post-secondary life. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we can navigate that to have to lessen the impact on the whole child. So here's what we know. Research is absolutely evolving. And although there's limited data, the research is telling us that this PASC, or post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 infection, really, really resembles a sustained concussion presentation in students. And that is something that we're all familiar with, that post-concussion protocol. And what symptoms do we see? In the classroom, we see fatigue, sleeping, head down, headaches, constant nurse visits, feeling fogged, not able to recall information either long term or short term, right? So that memory impairment. And that can be so startling and disheartening to somebody who has been generally able to participate up to this point. It's confusing, it makes you feel isolated, and it can start to exacerbate some of that mental health that we see. So, what can you do as the parent, as a fellow educator, as a fellow clinician? You got to find your team. The team approach is going to be so critical to sort of wrapping our arms around our individuals or our students related to PASC. So, who is your team? Your school psychologist is your number one go to. And I say that, and I'm not biased, but generally speaking, we're the ones who are supporting or facilitating multi tiered systems of supports or interventions for children. We're the 504 coordinator, and we sit on almost every IEP team. So, really seek out that school psychologist, but also any administrator. So, your assistant principals or your principals, your MTSS coordinators, your school counselors, or your nurses. That's your team. And what do you do once you find your team? You got to find somebody who's going to hear you. And that's why I say reach out to that school psychologist or your professional school counselor, because they've got that professional niche, right? Where they can really start to dig in and do some observations and talk to the student about how we can best support. But one of the next steps that's so critical, and sometimes, this is a very easily overlooked step. Share your medical documentation with the educational team so we can talk. The best realm of supports for a student is that full circle approach. So everybody's talking the talk and everybody's walking the walk. If we are not speaking the same language, how can we possibly think that student, your child, is going to progress and get better in that educational setting? It's so critical that the medical team and the educational team has time to meet, collaborate, consult with each other. And of course, that includes the parents, right? That educational team is you, is us. We're hand in hand together, making sure that your child gets the best level of education that they can. And it's about leveling that playing field to make sure that they can access their education just like their general ed peers. And we'll talk a little bit about what I'm referring to in terms of accessing, equalizing, right? You also want to talk about educational expectations in advance. So we've got COVID. We are now diagnosed with long haul COVID or PASC, right? And so we're thinking about a return to the building or a return to some form of learning, whether it be in person or online. How do we think about supporting that child? Everything needs to be planned in advance, and flexibly thinking is going to be a really critical piece. So what do I mean about planning in advance? I'm talking about meeting with the educational team and the medical team and talking about what accommodations and what types of supports are going to be needed. Do we need to talk about elevator use? Do we need to talk about a tapered day, right? So maybe not so much starting a full day, but maybe there's a couple of classes that we're going to start with, whether it starts the day or ends the day, because we got to be mindful. Each individual is going to be impacted in a different way. Much like our post-concussion folks, our PASC folks are going to present themselves with heavy fatigue, right? So if we ask them to come to a full day of school and they can't make it, we've already set them up for failure. So we have to be cognizant and mindful of the steps that we're taking. So I encourage you to sit around that table and really think about what your child may need. And maybe we're talking about returning to some virtual learning. And again, virtual learning, when I think about that, and it's maybe not so much the physical stamina, but the mental stamina of being able to continue to focus on a screen and go between tabs and do all, it is tiring. You only have so much reserve in your tank per se, related to, your ability to sustain and move forward. And so we got to be really mindful of that. So thinking about the academic accommodations, what the day looks like, do we need physical adaptations? So like I had mentioned when I first started, an elevator key. Can the classes be moved to the first floor and not the second floor? Can you enter in a closer door? All of those things should be talked about. And I really want you to be clear walking away from this, knowing that the progression is nonlinear. You gotta be prepared for setbacks, and that's okay. As long as we're all flexibly thinking and pivoting to the needs of the individual in front of us, we're gonna make a successful team and we're going to make progress. We don't expect students to return and be 100% capable of what they were able to do prior, right? And again, it's all based on baseline. So I'm not going to be asking somebody to come back and do 200%, right? So you just really have to keep thinking about how we can keep the pace and keep the education moving while filling in those gaps. Flexible thinking. I can't stress that enough. And that's just what the term that keeps coming to mind. I really want us to just be able to sit and brainstorm and be okay that we might have to go back from 5 periods to 4 periods. That's okay, because the end game is always going to be the same progression. What can I ask for from this COVID team leader or this school psychologist or your professional school counselor, right? What you want is these accommodations up front that can gradually taper out as we see success. And success is not on a timeline. It's not like I mentioned, it's a nonlinear progression, right? So it is however long it takes that individual to get back to their prior baseline. And so what are some of those academic and environmental accommodations that we could see in maybe a PASC 504, because really that's what we're going to be talking about, right? And I mentioned this a little bit before, is leveling that playing field. So when we level that a playing field, we provide accommodations, both academic and environmental, that level the field so we can all access our education in the same way. What we're really talking about is equity. So flexible attendance, understanding that there are times that you may have to resort to in-person virtual learning versus in-person learning, or you may be off that day and there may be a day where you can't make it to school. And so getting that team set and ready so we can get your work ready in some like in an accommodated faction. Thinking about physical education. So yes, gym is a requirement, but gym is also a flexible time to be able to think about it differently. Maybe part of your treatment plan is to do some mild yoga and stretching. Can the team consider those types of activities your gym requirement versus the typical, let's go out and play pickleball? Your tank, like I talked about earlier, may not be full enough, right? And we gotta really divvy out and make sure that we're not focused on the wrong thing. And so maybe having some accommodations related to physical education or utilizing the elevator, having all of our classes on the first floor, those types of things. I call them a preferred schedule. So you've got like a course, and then you've got, say, a progress period where you can take a breather. And then you've got a course, and then you've got a period where you can take a breather, more built-in study halls, more built-in brain breaks, more built-in time to really be able to focus on what you need to focus on and allow your body and your brain and your heart to heal during those interim downtimes. I think some of the other things that we really want to talk about is modifying the workload, streamlining work. So non essential written work is reduced, non essential or repetitive types of activities are reduced. Utilizing technology. Technology is our friend. So can we use a software that, is a speech to text or a text to speech where it reads to us and we can take a break and close our eyes while we listen to the content. Um, Hall passes for when we can transition when it's a non-crowded time. Being allowed to be late, a couple minutes late or a couple minutes early leaving from class is goes a long way for student success. Um, you know, we talked about flexible attendance, understanding that attention, concentration is going to be hindered. And so, what are we going to do? What strategies can we put in place to make sure that we are supporting that student? And so, again, right, helping with organization, giving organization time, allowing things to be turned in a day or two late, right? Small group setting for testing. All of those things really will model good prevention strategies for our students. And we, in all of this, whether it's related to PASC, whether it's related to post-concussion protocols, whether it's related to just people experiencing COVID-19 in its entirety, we have to monitor our emotional well-being. That is so critical. Now we have experienced not only COVID-19 as a pandemic, but we've experienced this mental health crisis. And I am so happy to be sitting here today to be able to share a link with you for the 988 crisis hotline. For any behavioral or mental health crisis, you're able to call anywhere at any time and get the help that you absolutely need. But what are we doing at the school setting? We're monitoring for any change in behavior. Any psychologist will tell you, we're looking for in 2 weeks, what was the frequency, intensity, and duration? And is that way different than your typical baseline? Yeah, you might spend some time as a teenager in your bedroom. Has it gotten longer? Are you not coming out? Are you not eating with us anymore? Are you spending most of your day, kind of hiding in a dark room or not at home and you feel like they're trying to escape? Those are all factors. Frequency, intensity, and duration over a 2-week period is really going to tell you something's not right. And if your gut is telling you something's off, let's get a screening. Let's approach the school and say, hey, we're noticing a behavior change. That's the first place you're going to see it, right? In the behavior. And then you can always ask the question, how are you feeling today? Have you been feeling like this a lot lately? On a 1 out of 10, talk to me about where you're at in terms of the feeling that you just described. And, I think always being able to ask and beg the question of, are you feeling suicidal? Are you feeling like you want to kill yourself? Those are important questions when we get down to thinking about monitoring someone's emotional well-being. Utilizing all of your resources, both at the school level and then in your community, is going to be critical. So your 988 crisis line, doing that monitoring, parents, us going, okay, I'm noticing a behavior change. What's the frequency, intensity, and duration? And being open about having the conversation. That's the first thing that you can do. You're never going to put that idea into somebody's mind. What you are doing is giving them a door to walk through and relieving them of some of that stress. Because I got to tell you, from PASC to post-concussion to COVID to life, it's heavy. And we need to be able to talk to our children, our teens, and our adults, and our friends and our neighbors about how they really feel. So destigmatize that mental health piece for a minute and really be able to support. So I said a lot of things. And really what I want you to take away from here is a bunch of a bunch of resources that really speak to what can we do to continue to support our students in the educational setting. I talked about the chapter 15, section 504, which is leveling that playing field and utilizing a medical diagnosis to really that has a large substantial impact on somebody's one of your essential living factors. Learning is one of them, and being able to provide them with a document that really is able to provide those in-depth accommodations that are individualized for that student. Utilizing that 988 crisis line when somebody you know or yourself is having a behavioral or a mental health crisis, you can speak to somebody immediately. Having that number in your back pocket is crucial. And just the periodical related to PASC from our National Association of School Psychologists is so critical because it talks through almost everything that I've talked about today and some best practice approach for all people. I want to thank you for listening today, and I want to thank you for taking your time to learn more about how to support and advocate for maybe a family member, somebody in your own household, an immediate family member, or for yourself. And please know that I am always here for you to reach out to, just to either have a listening ear, lend a listening ear, or a helping hand. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.